agenda, new business. First on the agenda is Stark and Tuscarawas County 2018-19 yard waste proposal. Who's going to do that?
Well, I'll introduce.
Yes, we have David Held.
Yes, thank you.
You would be the director.
Perfect.
I'm sorry, I don't want to demote you.
Yes.
Okay, so
I'm going to get, our captain here provides full service, which we appreciate. Thank you. I noticed I had a few short presentations. Thank you, Captain. And so, yeah, I appreciate you inviting me here today. I'm fine.
Good, how are you?
And so, what I'd like to do, I wish I would have brought my PowerPoint with me, but I didn't realize that as upgraded here. I like the presentation. I keep one for myself to pass those down. And so what we've done is, first off, for the record, my name is David Held. I work as the Executive Director at the Stark Tuscarawas Solid Waste District, and we're at 9918 Yorkshire Boulevard in Bolivar, Ohio. And so I was invited up here by the trustees and Lisa Campbell to come up and talk to you about the yard waste program. And what I'd like to do is I'll just, we put together a presentation because I had an opportunity to go and talk to New Mechelen Township. We talked to the Stark County Township Association meeting, which we have our representatives there. And then we also spoke with Perry Township, Jackson Township, so we're trying to get around to all the different townships. We'll start with the first slide. And this really, what I'm hoping to do is we'll just run through these quickly because after receiving a number of different questions, hopefully we'll cover most of your questions in this, but if you have any during the presentation, let me know and we'll be able to address those. So when you look at how the district's money is spent, the first slide here where it says total expenditures 2014, this first slide right here. This basically is a pie chart as far as how the money is appropriated. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, our total expenses in 2014 were roughly $2.8 million. Our revenue at the time was $4.1 million. So clearly we were bringing in more money than what we were spending. And then you look at the breakout, in the orange, we got a large portion of that going to the drop-off recycling. Plain Township has been a great partner in the area of recycling and in yard waste because we have a number of drop-offs here in Plain Township. Your staff is excellent. Lisa is very responsive, and so is Rob Steinberg. I mean, everybody that we work with does an excellent, excellent job. So we very much appreciate that. So most of the effort is in the drop-off recycling. People will come in and they drop off their paper, plastic, glass, aluminum cans at the drop-offs. We had problems as far as dumping in the higher volume sites, but we've got the cameras up, and I know that those are working very well because you have a nice camera system here in Plain Township. We've got a few glitches with the one camera over on Diamond, but we're going to work through that through the IT. You got that taken care of? Okay, good. So we've got that taken care of. Those are excellent because then the Sheriff's Department, we have the Stark County Sheriff Officer of the Year was Chris Newman, who's with the Stark Sheriff's Department, and he is the litter deputy. So the district pays him full-time to manage all the dump sites and any problems that they have with yard waste. So when you look at this pie here, the reason I put this first chart on here is if you look at the next slide, you see the green. In 2014, there is no green. And in 2017, you see that green slice down there at the bottom. That's yard waste. So we went from 0 in 2014 in yard waste expenditures to $439,000. And you can see also in the upper left-hand corner our total expenses during that time in 2017 went up to $4.5 million. Okay? And our revenue was at $4 million. Okay? So you can see that our expenses continue to go up. And then when you look over in the upper right-hand corner, the Ohio EPA requires that we provide recycling drop-offs. That's a requirement. Yard waste is not a requirement. Household hazardous waste collection is not a requirement. We have to promote those things, but we don't have to conduct a collection. We must collect recycling drop-offs or curbside. Okay? Now the next page, you look at the tipping fee revenue. So we make money at the district. We're exclusively funded through a fee that every ton of waste that's dumped in a landfill, we collect either $1 from our residents and businesses here in Stark County for that. If you're outside the district, we collect $2. If you're outside of the state, which is a very, very low volume, we collect $2. Okay? No, I'm sorry, $1. And the reason being is you have the interstate commerce laws, which say whatever you charge for your residents, you got to charge for the same out of state. But the reason this slide is important, if you look at the red, back in 1994, the revenue was about 2.8 million. Then if you look at 2004, that's when I first started at the district, 6.2 million. And then since that time, the revenue just seemed to go downhill after that. It dropped as low as 2.7 million. And that's because you have contracts with the waste haulers. If Republic has a contract with the city of Cleveland, they bring the waste to their landfill, which is American Landfill here in Stark County. When Rumpke took the contract over, they're going to take the waste to their landfill, which is now in Mansfield. So when these contracts change, the flow of waste goes with whoever has the contract. And then, of course, our revenue changes. So it can change, you know, usually the contracts are every 1 to 3 years, so it's a very volatile environment. So that's where you can see the volatility in the revenue. And also another interesting point, if you see the yellow line there, the yellow dotted yellow line, that shows our in-district waste. And of course, we've been pretty consistent with the population, but you can see that minor dip there in 2009, and that's due to the economic downturn. So we do know that the economy, the health of the economy is reflected in the waste that we produce. And it dropped down, and it started to come back up, but it's never really reached the level that we had in 2006 and 2007. But I think a lot of that has to do with the amount of material that is generated as far as waste. You know, a plastic bottle weighs less, aluminum cans weigh less, there's less newspaper, so there's less waste that's being generated overall because the material that they're using is changing. And then we'll look at the next slide here, and it's the total expenses versus our fund balance. So sometimes people would say, oh, well, the district has loads of money, you should loosen up your financial reins and just pay for this yard waste. And the thing is back in 2007, we had $9.9 million, and that amount dropped really quickly. And the reason that dropped is the Ohio EPA, when we were challenging their decisions on the landfills, they said, well, they didn't say it, but it was kind of implied that they didn't like the fact that we were challenging them at the Environmental Review Appeals Commission. So they set up a budget for us, they took over our plan, and they set our expenditures at $8.1 million in 2008, and they set up our expenditures at $8.3 million in 2009. So we spent down our reserve balance, down to the point where we're at 3.3. We've determined that we have to keep it at around 1 year's worth of revenue, so it's about $3.5 million that we're required. This is self-imposed as reserves because you have volatility in the revenue. And so right now in 2016, 2017, we're keeping about, you know, a little bit more than 1 year's revenue on hand. And but again, with the volatility in our revenue, you know, it can be a real challenge. So I think we're in a solid, stable place. And that's where we got to be really careful with what we spend. So if you look at the next page, the total yard waste expenses. In 2008, we were spending nearly $700,000 in yard waste collection. And then it started to drop, $570,000. And in 2010, it was virtually non-existent as far as an expense. It says $39,000, but that was just carryover expenses from the previous year. And then all through 11, 12, 13, and 14, we spent no money on yard waste. The reason being is there was a lot of value in yard waste. So the companies that collect it and they turn it into compost or mulch like earth and wood, they were buying semi-loads for $600 a pop. And they were collecting it from the site in Plain Township at Wursler Brothers and also behind the fire station at no cost. We loved it. So we even added a few. We thought, oh, this is great. There's no cost here. So we went from 8 sites up to 15. And then in 2015, the yard waste market started to change. You have the pipelines that were coming through, a lot of additional clearing for bringing the pipelines through. There was a company, Stone Container, down in Coshocton. They made corrugated cardboard. They would collect up to 30 semi-loads a day of wood chips. They would buy it. And so when they closed in 2016, now you have 1 million yards of yard waste in this market, in combination with the Nexus pipeline, in combination with the Rover pipeline. So we got a lot of volume. Most of the places, I talked with Sean Worsler today, he has material that he cannot sell. He has material that he can't even, give away at a wholesale level, right? So, and that's because the market's changing. People are buying stone instead of the mulch. So the retail market's going down, and at the same time, there's just a massive amount of yard waste. So you can see with the saturation in the market, then of course, Craig Sneed, who we contract with, says, well, now I'm going to charge it, instead of $100 a load, it's going to be $112 a load. Then the next year, it's going to be $124 a load. Now in 2018, he says it's going to be $145 a load. So our costs just kept going up. So what we did, in 2018, we said we have to set the amount at $300,000. Just find a way to budget at $300,000. And what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to leave the township in a bad spot. So we appropriated approximately another $100,000 for 2018, okay? And this red mark here was what was projected for $145 a load. So right now we've got 400 grand, and we just have to reduce the number of sites, or we have to better control the flow, or we have to better, negotiate the contract as far as what we do with the others. Myself, we have exhausted negotiating the contract because there's really one person to negotiate with, and that's Craig Sneed at Earth and Wood. He's like the Walmart of yard waste. We've worked very well with him. He's been very responsive. The other company that we used to work with, Weisgarber, that gave excellent service, they no longer collect the yard waste. So the one concern that we have, there's really two issues. One is the cost keeps going up, and secondly, my concern is if we don't have a place to take the material. What happens when the sites are filled up? And especially our fire chief, when you load that mulch and you keep loading it and you put it up, what happens? It catches fire. And so they have a daily fire, not one that brings in the fire department, but at Earth and Wood, Craig Sneed told us that, I said, Craig, you got a limited amount of land here. And I said, so what do you do? He goes, well, let's just stack it higher. And he said, but it does create more combustion and they have more fires. So it's harder to manage. But at some point, he's got 3 years worth of material right now. At some point, there's a limit. I just don't know what that limit is, but I do know he's bringing in about 20 semi-loads a day at $200 a pop. So he used to pay $600 for a truckload. Now they're dropping it off to him and paying him to take it. The other locations, they don't have enough room. So the market's saturated. It's not just the cost, but it's just being very, very strategic as far as how we handle the intake. If you go to the next slide, what we did is we put together a proposal, and this is in cooperation with the Stark County Commissioners. And keep in mind that 95% of the yard waste that's spent at the solid waste district is going to Stark County. We have a 3-county board, so we have 3 from Wayne County, 3 commissioners, 3 from Tuscarawas County, 3 from Stark County. So even if you're calling the Stark County Commissioners and saying, we've got to have this, keep in mind, they'll all unanimously support their own county, but in Wayne County, we spend $0 on yard waste. In Tuscarawas County, we'll spend probably a little less than $20,000. But their populations are smaller, their demographics are different, they're more, Wayne County is predominantly rural, so they don't have as much demand for the yard waste like we do in the more urban areas and suburban areas of Plain Township. And then Tuscarawas County is the least populated area, 92,000. Stark is about 370,000. So there's different demographics, different needs. So what we're going to do with this here is we just looked at all 12 sites. We did remove the Worsler brothers. I did talk with Sean Worsler already today and explain to him why we were going to close that site. And I know that the street department, or the road department has already removed the signs over there at Worsler Brothers. And naturally it's an uncomfortable situation for the Worslers because people are calling them, just as I'm sure they're calling your township, just as they're calling us at the district. especially with the nice weather. But the problem is, and what we want to do, and we'd like to get this out to all the residents, is that we're really concerned about having a place to take all this material. Plain Township has been a model yardway site. Because you have gates, you've got cameras, and you restrict the flow. The other sites, some of them have kept the sites wide open. We were okay with that. It wasn't a bad thing. It's just that when it was free, we didn't care if a commercial company came in and dropped off a tree trunk at midnight because Earth and Wood would take it. Our volume was going up, and even though it isn't intended for commercial, it didn't cost us anything, so nobody made a big issue out of it. Now that we're paying for it, we have to tighten up the reins, we have to target it exclusively for residents, and we've got to find a different way of doing it. So, as you look through all of this, and the first, what we did is we listed all the sites. The ones in blue are Stark County sites. The ones in the orange color, those are Tuscarawas County sites. The one in yellow is Wersler Brothers, and so what we did is we eliminated that site for a couple of reasons. Number one, we needed to reduce the number of sites, but number two, it was a private company, and they were also located in Plain Township. And Plain Township, we were fortunate enough for many years to have 2 sites, which was great for your township. But then some of the other townships, they only have 1, or they have 0. And the residents typically look at the service as a great service, but then it's a big burden on the employees and the staff of the township and the budget of the township. So after we went through this whole formula, we looked at the population, we looked at the number of loads that each site had in 2017. So we based it on volume. And when you look at Plain Township, you folks we're at 417 loads. You're at 3,500 tons. Okay, you're the third one down. And the total volume that you had out of all that was collected was 11%. So we had a total of 31,815 tons, and you were approximately 11%, but you were number 3. The other 2 sites, Jackson did not restrict their intake. So they had gates, but they kept the gates open as a convenience to the residents. Those gates are going to be closed now in the coming summer. Lake Township, they follow the same model that you have, and they lock up their gates. Okay? So really, Lake and Plain, I don't think that putting, we're looking at Jackson Township and thinking if they lock up the gate, their volume should align more with what yours is. But that's just a projection. So then you look at the total cost for the district to haul this. And the district spent $46,000 hauling yard waste for that particular site. We also spent another $29,000 at the Wersler Brothers. So really, we were about, in both sites, there was over $90,000 that was spent there. So we looked at each site, we based it on volume, and then we looked at what the projected cost was going to be in 2018 based on $145 per load haul, and what the expense would be based on 2017's volume to the township for this site would be $60,000. So what we decided to do is we'll say that the district will say, okay, we'll give you $48,000. We took a percentage. And then you also have the yard waste or the host community cleanup grant, which is $2,500. And then when you add those 2 together, it would be $51,000. So we're looking at the projected expense. If the volume remained exactly the same, it would cost the township $9,146. Okay? Now, when we were at the Township Association, Joe, you had mentioned to me about, we had 2 sites, and now it's going to put more of a burden on the township. And that's a very good point, because I'm sure that it will, or it very well could. But then also, some of those people, might go to Jackson, they might go to Canton Township. We're just not sure, but I'm sure, a large percentage of them will go to the other site. But we were trying to find the fairest way that we could to appropriate the money. And so we just took all the sites and we did it on volume based on 2017. We also closed all the sites from January 1st to possibly the middle of March. But the thing that we know is that we just have to control the volume. And what I'm concerned about is that as we get through part of the year, and this is where I think it's going to be the best for Plain Township, is that is that you open and you close the gates and you have restricted hours. If you go to the city of Massillon, they're not on our list, but they have a yard waste collection, they pay for it themselves, and their site's open from 7 to 3:30. And that gate closes automatically. Now people will say, oh, it's not convenient. Well, you could argue that it's not really a convenient time, but they do control their volume. So we don't have, a specific recommendation, because I think that all of your staff here has a better idea as far as how to manage the flow and which days and how to keep it open. But we're just trying to transition into a period of uncertainty with yard waste. We just simply don't know. If we had all of your residents, that were here present, we would just say there is no way that we can ensure the sustainability of the program, even if the funds were unlimited. Because again, it goes back to where we can take the material. We did think about buying 20 acres and just having a site. But then we'd be running into the same problem that the Wursler brothers are faced with. They have like 3 years of material, and then they've got to go in weekly, and they've got to turn it, windrow it. So that's where we're at right now. If you go to the next page, this was another recommendation. And this is really going to be based on 2019, because again, we have $100,000 in transition funding this year, and when you look at 2019, we're going to be, we're projected to have budgeted $300,000. So the amount that we're able to give out at the district is going to go down. We're hoping at that point we'll have fewer sites, we'll have a better handle on managing the intake, and maybe the market will change at that point. Maybe we'll be able to, change, the contract and the cost. But based on having the reduction in the grant in 2019, Plain Township will be at, it would be a cost of $22,000 if everything remained the same. So what we're looking to do is any ideas that you as elected officials have, that your staff has, that any of your residents have, we are open to it because we like to brainstorm and find ways that we can improve things. A number of residents have called me and said, well, this is terrible, this is a great service. It is a great service. Again, it's not a requirement, and it's an expensive service to the developer. And then the last page here we have is, I've got two pages, and then we'll wrap this up, is that when you look at the other 52 districts around the state, how many of them have the program that we have here in Stark County? They just don't provide that. Most, you go to Cuyahoga County, you go to Summit County, those residents up there take their yard waste to a compost facility, and in some cases they probably pay to dispose of it, or they put it in the garbage. Or some trustees have told us that they put it in ditches, and which we don't want that, we don't encourage that, it's illegal. But it's just, we provided a great service. The trustees and your department has provided a great service here over the years, but it's just, we're just at a point where as we collect this, we're not quite sure what we can do with it. And lastly, here's a list of the compost facilities that are in this area, and you can see the ones in the yellow are the ones that reported large volumes. And again, it's not required that they report their tonnage, but you can see how Earth and Wood is collecting 24,000 tons. And the next site is over just south of Alliance, 4,700 tons, and that's Mike's Tree and Landscape. So, and the others are just very small. So that's where we're at. And the recommendation that we would have to the township at this point is to proceed with what you're doing, and with the locked gates, and then also restricting the commercial businesses, because that's not what it's intended for. If you were to have anybody that's dumping, then you call the sheriff, and Chris Newman. That's what he does full time, because he will follow up on any dumps and any problems. If you have any questions or thoughts.
The only sad thing with, I understand this was a good presentation, and enlightened me a little bit more to understanding it. The burden that we're going to have on our fire station on Easton. But the most highly populated tree area in Plain Township is the west end, is Avondale. And now they just lost their site. So what happens to us, Joe? We're going to have the majority, probably all of Avondale now, when you get a storm, we're talking a lot of limbs.
And if there, yeah, and the storms, that's a good point, because I didn't bring this up. We do have separate funding for storms. So if there was a storm, like we had through Lake Township, when they had all those, what's that? Yeah, the microburst, right, when they had the microburst come through, and we've had them, a number of them over the years, we do have separate funding for that. So I didn't mean to interject there, I just wanted to add, yeah.
To clarify, the 2019 numbers are not set in stone, correct? At the end of 18, the numbers are revisited to see how the trends
Yeah, I mean, that's
shift.
what,
I mean,
that's,
that was what was discussed at the County Township Association meeting, so that's what I wanted.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I would say that what's set in stone is our 5-year plan at the district, so we have to submit a 5-year plan. And we will, we put in there $300,000 for the yard waste. But it doesn't mean that additional money couldn't be appropriated if there was, if we came up with another solution or, but I just don't want to, I don't want to set expectations that are false. So what we do know is we will have $300,000.
I think though, I mean, obviously there's money in the bank for whatever year that's going to be. Our biggest concern is what's going to take place with the Whistler site closing down. Because even if we get half, just half, because when you calculated these figures for the tonnages, you didn't include the 2,219 from the Whistler site.
Right, you're right.
It's going to go somewhere.
You're right.
Our fear is, if in reality we get half of that, say we only get 1,100 tons, half of that, then we should be getting 15% of the money
Right.
instead of our 11 or 12, whatever it came to.
Right.
Actually, we got 12.2.
Right.
Now that's deceiving because these percentages are based on the total amount, but the calculations are based on taking the 2219 out of the Whistler. So my frustration is, if that goes up that amount, that's almost $12,000 for us. And we're pinching pennies, and I understand everybody's pinching pennies. All
Right,
I'm
but
looking at
you're
is,
just
we would just
identifying
like to
what
have
the
our
fairness.
fair amount.
Yeah, right, I understand that. And
And-
that's a very good point.
So we would, maybe this can't be changed now, maybe this has already been done,
No,
but I would
it's-
agree with Scott, next year, but if this hasn't been done, I would certainly like to come, and if I had to,
Yeah, it's address like the.
make my address to that as to what could happen, because that's almost $12,000 for us. And I, like Al, believe people get into that routine.
Yeah,
So on this side, they know exactly when that thing's open and exactly when it's closed. They may not like it, but they know it, and they're going to use it. I believe the people on the other side are going to do the same thing. They're really going to be frustrated with the closing, but they're also going to know, I can take my stuff over there, and I think they will establish a routine to do that.
you mean to bring it over to the.
Over to our site here, which now means, obviously, the tonnage there goes up.
Yeah,
That's my concern, because right now we're speculating where they're going to take it. I mean, we're kind of doing this with human nature.
right.
What's their routine going to become? And we don't know.
We
that.
don't know.
But I got to believe that our residents, because they're Wayne
They're committed
Township
to it, yeah.
loyal residents, are going to believe that I'm going to my site,
Right.
even though it's technically everybody's
No,
site.
I agree with you. What I will do is I will take this back to our board, and, because one of the things we're not sure of too is that I believe some of the sites are gonna drop off. And so, one thing is,
What happens with that funding?
Yeah.
Does that go back into kitty, does it get
Right.
redistributed,
Right.
or is that just seen as a
yeah,
potential net savings for
yeah,
2018, and it makes the transition into 19?
right. That's a good question. And I don't have an answer on that, but I think it's clear that there's, some flexibility that we have. One of the things we have to think of is whether or not let's say that there's a funding adjustment, then the township would have to consider, you know, would you still keep the one site open? And, you know, because at some point in 2019, you're gonna be faced with the same thing. And our thought is, what we decided to do at the district is when we went from 15 sites to 10 sites, we just strategically picked 5 sites to close. And why did we pick those sites? They were the ones that were furthest away from Earth and Wood. And so Earth and Wood would give us a contract, and they would say whether we pick it up in Brewster, or we pick it up in Lake or Plain, which are the closest, or Jackson, that we're going to pay the same amount. But he wanted all the sites. So really, the sites that were closer were paying the same, the district was paying for it. So what we could do is, you know, it's something that the trustees would have to think about if there was an adjustment that we made in the funding based on the number of sites that are participating. You know, it still might be better to have one site because we just don't, but that's going to be something that you folks would have to deal with. I don't see it getting any easier next year. And it's simply because you have the market that's changing. And one other side note is that if you have a semi-load of yard waste, it's prohibited from a landfill. So it's not permitted to go on landfill. Now, if you take your bag of grass and you put it at the curb, it's perfectly legal. And that was a law that was passed like back in the 80s. The Ohio EPA made a recommendation to prohibit yard waste from the landfills. But, and you know, my assessment, this is my personal assessment, is that they didn't recognize how much volume there would be, and that there wasn't enough sites to manage all the volume. So then they modified their, you know, their enforcement and said if it's commingled with garbage, then it can go to a landfill. So it's still legal for your residents to put yard waste in the garbage, but the big truckloads have to take it to a compost site, and that's where I believe that when you have the big places like Earth and Wood, he's going to accommodate those sites because, you know, he could charge them more. And then at some point, you know, when that site is limited, you know. So what I'll do is I will go back and take your concerns to the Stark County Commissioners, and you know, certainly you can feel free to call them about that. But, you know, I'll make sure and get a hold of them, if not tonight, tomorrow, to let them know that, and then, you know, see what we can do as far as adjusting. But I just don't know what, I don't have anything to, you know, offer right now, because I just don't know where we're going to be at. But our board meeting is this Friday, and we'll probably have a better idea how many participants. I think there's, you know, a couple of sites that are not going to open up. So Lawrence Township has told us that they are committed to keeping their site closed, and I believe Tuscarawas Township, and so that's where we're at with this. I believe Jackson Township is looking at their options. You know, another thought too is that just brainstorming, we had one site that was thinking about just keeping open for the last quarter, like leaf season. You know, like you just keep it open during the leaf season, and you know, like let's say September through October, because that's where, actually the weight isn't as much. When you look at the total volume, it's basically 6% in the first quarter, and then the rest is a third, with maybe 34% in the fourth quarter.
David, let me ask you a crazy question though. Are you allowed to have shared sites? Because the Whistler, less than a mile is Jackson Township. Over here on Easton, less than a mile is the city of North Canton. Can sites be shared?
Yeah, yeah. See, that's like a,
Regardless of where they're taken.
But I mean, shared, but
they're
I
all
mean,
start.
us involved in the cost.
right.
Yeah, so from a cost sharing.
Cost sharing, yes. Jackson and Plain are now.
So what
cost sharing
happened? That's
operating.
a very good point. And so what happened was with Louisville and Nimishillen. Louisville had a yard waste collection site, and the EPA didn't like that it was close to a storm drain, which was close to a creek, and so they recommended that they close it. And so when they closed it, New Michelin, of course, had a massive influx of yard waste. And so Louisville does participate, you know, in a sharing of that site.
Is that possible then?
Yeah, I mean, really, what we're,
Jackson, North, they're both
yeah.
this close.
What we're looking at is, see, others, you know, when you look at it from a critical standpoint, if you have like the consultants that work with us across the state, they look and say, what are you doing? You're hauling yard waste from a township to the site, and they look at it from a different perspective. They're saying, you know, Jackson Township was 4 miles from Earth and Wood, and you're spending $70,000 to haul it down the road, and it's not ground. You know, so if you grind it up, you could get, you know, 3 loads for every 1 load. But the problem is, if you're at a site that is near residential homes, people aren't going to want to hear that grinder humming for. Now, you know, Lake Township, they're grinding right now with Metcalf, so they're planning on going to Metcalf, and they're going to grind and haul it to Metcalf. And you know, that's the approach that they're going to be taking. So what we would do is this: is that what we can assure you of, you know, our recommendation to the board this Friday is going to be that you know, you get the fixed amount that is based on the 400,000. So that for Plain Township is set at 48,000, plus you get the 2,500 for the host community cleanup. So I'm confident that that will pass this Friday. I don't expect it to. And then what we'll do is we're going to look to see how many sites we have and how much additional funding we have to see where else we can help you out. But I would think the challenge to Plain Township would be to decide, you know, based on the funding, what is the best way you can spend it? Is it, you know, having one site? I would think, my own opinion, I would stress that it's, you know, we're not in an expanding market. We are in a shrinking yard waste collection market. And I think the sooner you reduce your collections and your sites, it's just going to make it easier to manage. Because then in the event that you had to close it due to not having a place to take it, it would be easier to close one site than it would be 2 or 3. So we would give a block grant, and we would give you like the first quarter up front, and then, but we would give you a specific amount, and how you would spend it would be up to you folks. And then we would ask, Earth and Wood would honor the $145 a ton. If you had another company that could haul it at a less expense, or somebody else that could take it or manage it, you could do that too. But we just are pretty confident that it's going to be tough to find that, because we haven't been able to find it, and you know, but you know, you never know. There could be an article in the paper and somebody decides to do something differently. But I would caution you that a lot of the sites, they may have a very hungry appetite to increase their business, but then just go out and look at the site. You know, if they got like 4 acres or 3 acres, you know, we're talking a lot of truckloads. Okay?
So the grant dollars, do they come direct to us, or do they pay the haulers?
Yeah, we're going to send it directly to you. That's
Okay.
a very good question. We're going to send it directly to the township, and then we'll just call it a block grant. We're going to give you a designated amount, and which is specified here. And then, but then it would be up to you folks to either pay the additional amount, and that's where some were saying, okay, maybe the later we open it up in the year. You know, do we keep it open just during leaf season? Do we, you know, how do we handle this?
And I'm guessing from an overall accountability standpoint, we would definitely want to log tonnages and all that kind of
Yes,
stuff.
yeah.
Because even in your stats, you would,
Yeah, you still have to report the expenses, so it's not
Exactly.
like we're just giving it and saying, hey, spend it however you want.
Sure.
You've got to, so it would be a reimbursement. We would give you the money up front, but you would still have to be able to justify that you had so many loads.
and those numbers would be the only way you could fairly distribute all this in the first place for the next time.
Right. But if you come up with a creative way, you know, that is, you know, going to be a cost savings, you know, we'll work with you on that too. It's just that, you know, you can't go out there and say, we're going to spend it on, you know, buying new picnic tables or, you know, something like that. because it would be specifically for the yard waste program. You know, employees or,
So whether we load the volume in with front-end bucket loader as is, or
Grind it up.
we're grinding it in to get more tonnage, we're compacting the volumes what we are.
We're looking at that option, yes.
Loads a load.
We're looking at it.
Who will keep track of those loads?
usually the company that you contract with, what they'll do is they have to keep track of, you know, obviously for invoice purposes, because they would be billing, like at the solid waste district, Earth and Wood, they give us a weight ticket on each truck. So every load that they collect, there is a weight ticket. We actually, we didn't require them to weigh it this past year, because it's a lot of extra work. And when we look at all the loads, you know, they're about 8.5 tons per load. But you have to be careful, because sometimes if Earth and Wood shows up on Monday morning, you know, at 8 o'clock, and you don't have that bin full, they're gonna haul it, whether it's half full or, but I wouldn't say that that's too big of a problem, especially with you folks that
So
choose.
they'll send them weight tickets to us?
Yeah, they would send those weight tickets to you folks. See, because one of the other issues is that, you know, we have to make sure that the townships are managing their own volume. Because historically, we did that for everybody, and we just always paid whatever that amount was. And so, but we're not gonna be able to do that. We need to have the townships come up with, you know, different ideas or different ways to manage it. And obviously, the incentive to having a more comprehensive management of the program is that it's like, okay, here's the money, and, you know, what's the best way to spend it? And we're hoping that we could come up with some innovative ideas or strategies, you know, as far as what you know, satisfying the residents.
If you had mentioned at the Township Association meeting the other night, do you have a grant for automatic gates?
Yes.
How do we?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we have what's called a program startup grant, and we could fund an automatic gate. And so we've put them up in a number of places. They work really well. I actually had it tested, not intentionally, but when I was in Massillon, I was over there looking at their yard waste site, and their recycling drop off, and I got locked in at like 3:30. And I was like, oh boy, what do I do now? You know, and so I just pulled up, you know, thinking, looking for a button or something to press, it automatically opens. So then I learned that they have an electronic eye, so that if somebody is behind it in their car, it automatically opens. So that if somebody were to get, if it were to close, let's say at, you know, 7 p.m. or 6 p.m., and the gate closes and somebody's in there, they just pull up and it'll open. And
But is it set for, you set it for your days and
Yes.
hours?
Yeah, you can set it for, you know, whatever time you want to open, whatever time you want to close. Another thing too, and Joe, I'm sure you've probably seen this, when you're loading the yard waste, you know, it's not a good idea to have cars pulling up and dropping off material, because
That happens a lot.
yeah, and you know, because I mean, you know, with snow plowing or whatever program you have, I mean, you know that, right? People they just keep driving, or they just pull up. And so I know that some of the sites, what they're thinking about doing is if they load on Mondays, Mondays are really busy, they're not going to be open on Monday mornings. But you folks already have days that are closed.
We're open Monday, Thursday, Saturday. In the fall, we were open 7 days, but that won't probably be the case.
I'm just thinking, this is just based on my experience at the district, the leaves are, if you were to establish priorities, leaf collection is the biggest challenge overall, because it's the highest volume. But fortunately, it's not the highest, you know, you can compact those leaves pretty well. And if you can grind something. The other thing is too, is I don't know if you had like a number of acres, or you had a place that you could, you know, use that maybe isn't close to a residential area, because I was thinking about the Worsler brothers, maybe if they had more land, maybe you could collect a higher volume and grind it there, but they're limited as far as the floodplain.
So we can go to your website for that grant for the gate?
Yeah, and if you call our office and you ask for Tiffany, in our office, Tiffany Hall, and just ask her for you to, she will send you a copy, and we'll be sending it out.
Great.
I'm not sure, Rob, do we normally go through you on the grants for that? I wasn't quite sure.
Joe and I did it together last
Yeah,
year.
you both did it together, okay. And so you can send that, and, you know, you just get a cost. I think they're probably like an automatic gate. For the gate and everything, it was like 10,000, but you already have the gate, right?
Right.
Is it a sliding one, so then you just have the power
Yes.
unit?
Yeah.
We have it down in Canton Township, and they work really, really well. Any other questions?
No, we appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you.
Doing
And
like
and also,
song.
I have to tell you, you have a beautiful place.
Thank you.
You have this is a nice room, and I love the presentation with the sheriff's department. You've got a great township, you're very good neighbors to us, and very good partners with the solid waste district, which we appreciate, because every time we have a problem or an issue, you've all been very, very responsive, you have excellent staff. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.